Hello and welcome everybody. Today we continue our third lecture about the Panov attack in the Caracan defense. So after e4, c6, d4, d5, e takes d5, c takes d5. So for the last two lectures we were studying this aggressive weapon as white against the Caracan defense, which so-called Panov attack, or also in some literature it's called Alohin attack. But I would say that the great popularity is this move c4 started after Botvinnik. Mikhail Botvinnik played a few very instructive games. So what's the problem in this position after knight f6, knight c3, and the white is creating the strong pressure over the black's central pawn on d5. So last time we were studying here the standard move knight c6, which could be made by aggressive bishop g5. After g6, this move is not so popular in today's practice, and the reason is simple. So Mikhail Botvinnik found that after queen b3, black almost forced to sacrifice the pawn on d5. So after queen b3, black plays bishop g7, and after c takes d5, white is getting the extra pawn when black is keeping some compensation again. For instance, after knight e2, then white's knight is going to f4, so white is completing the development with bishop to e2 or bishop to c4, short castling, and the black is just going to work very hard for winning back this pawn on d5. And let's say when black is playing e6, then in that position, that white could simply get quite strong initiative after both, or bishop g5, pinning the knight and increasing the pressure over the black's position. At the same time, also c takes d5 leads to the much better position for white. So black just weakens too much his dark squares, and once again, in case of e takes d5, bishop g5 is very unpleasant. And after knight takes d5, white has a choice possible to play knight f3 and intending knight bishop g5, intending bishop b5. So very active position for white here. So that's why g6 is not so popular move. And so we are going to study more serious the outcome of e6, which is the most, I would say, classical and the standard way for black playing this position. After which, in almost 90% of the situation, white is reaching the isolated queen's pawn on d4. Standard way for white here is to play knight f3, and black is doing differently. So black could develop the bishop on e7, could play bishop to b4, and even d takes c4. But I would like first of all just to give you some samples from my games, which I played against ICC users, ICC members, during my simultaneous exhibitions and the blitz games, when I used the Panov attack as my favorite opening against the Caracan defense. And you immediately could realize what problems black face in the situation with white's isolated pawn. So this pawn not always is a weakness on d4, but in many situations this pawn is helping white to increase his activity in the center and on the king side, and to create the quite unpleasant offense over the black's king side. So one of my games continues a6, c takes d5, knight takes d5. Definitely black would like to capture on d5 with a knight. So in that case, white has isolated pawn, and now we have a quite interesting question. If that pawn helps white into attack, or white would need to protect this pawn for a while and only to play for the even game. So bishop d3. White is posing his bishop immediately towards the black's king side. Knight c6. Short castling. Bishop e7. Rook e1. So the most natural continuation of white is moving the rook to the open file. Also increasing some pressure over the center. e5 square. In some situations the rook could be lifted via e4 to g3, or via e3 to g4 to g3, just to help white's kingside attack. Short castling. And another important move, a3. So white is planning maybe to play bishop c2 and then queen d3. In that case, b4 square is one of the most important in this structure. So right now, black is having a problem about his bishop on c8. Rook e8, bishop c2, exactly white is creating the setup. Bishop c2 and queen comes to d3. Queen c7, and this move is a serious mistake. Why? Because black just forget about the controlling the d5 square, which allowing white immediately to smash black's position on the king side. Look at that. So much better was bishop d7, or even knight f6, trying to cover black's weaknesses on the king side. Look, all white pieces are looking toward it. Both bishops, knight, rook, and this knight is also very, very active. So queen c7 just allowing white to start almost decisive attack. Another tactical problem here, tactical nuance, the rook on e8 is hanging in many situations and many variations. So white is playing knight takes d5, e takes d5. Now the e file is opened, and knight g5. So already black is in big trouble. Bishop cannot remove this aggressive knight on g5 because it says checkmate on e8. Black played g6, and white answered with another typical knight sacrifice. Knight takes h7, breaking through king side, so ruining black's position there. King takes h7, queen h5 check. Since the bishop on c2, the pawns on g6 is hanging, so white just brings the queen into the attack. King g7, queen h6 check. So white is now ready for the second sacrifice. Bishop take g6, h take g6, queen take g6, and now we can understand very simple line that king f8 only way to protect the rook on e8, losing immediately because of bishop h6 and the checkmate. And move like king h8, just queen takes e8, king g7, queen h5, once again creating the dead threat. Bishop h6, force black to play queen d6. This is only way to stop bishop h6. And now finally we are bringing the rook in the attack. Rook e3, and black absolutely hopeless against the rook g3, and white's attack continues with the decisive threats on the king side. Just my opponent decided to resign because he just didn't find any way to continue the game. So this is just very fast game, 20 something moves. We can already understand what kind of problems black facing in the Panov attack when white is having the isolated pawn but the space advantage. Let's look at the position after the opening. Despite the fact that white is having this isolated pawn, sometimes this is a problem, but in the situation when white is having all the pieces in the game, all pieces are very active, and black cannot simply simplify the position, cannot exchange the pieces, especially the queens, white is keeping quite unpleasant initiative on the king side and in the center. So black's main task in such a situation is trying to exchange pieces. White is having more space. Black should try to exchange white's pieces, which are attacking, which are looking towards the center and towards the king side. Okay, one more game. So in the second game, in that position after knight f3, my opponent chose the standard and classical bishop e7 move. C takes d5. Knight takes d5. So once again, black doesn't like to play e takes d5, but keeps white with the isolated pawn on d4. And bishop c4. So already you can realize that white has two different plans. One is to play bishop d3 and to attack on the king side. Second, bishop c4. This plan, by the way, played by Mikhail Botvinnik. So after bishop c4, white is also trying not to forget the center squares, so especially the d5 square. Knight takes c3. It's quite rare move. So much better in this situation. Usually, black is continuous knight c6, short castling, and after rook e1 we have the classical position. So when move b6 happened in the game between Botvinnik and Alokhin, which the Russian champion, Soviet Union champion, just won very, I would say, brilliantly in the endgame after knight takes d5, e takes d5, and bishop b5, just getting clear positional advantage. Vishy Anand and Anatoly Karpov preferred to play in this position a7, a6, intending later to capture on c3 and only then to push b5 and get the bishop to b7, trying to create the counterplay on the queen side as well. So knight takes c3 is quite rare move. Just black shows his plan too early. B takes c3, short castling, knight c6, bishop d3. So it's no point anymore to keep the bishop on c4. So bishop started to look towards the black's position on the king side. At the same time, don't forget that after knight takes c3, white is not having anymore the isolated pawn in the center. Now we have some kind of hanging pawn structure. So white has two pawns in the center, but at the same time, this pawn structure c3 and d4 is quite serious aim in black's position, because it's quite difficult to create pressure over these pawns when white still keeping the space advantage and could develop quite unpleasant attack over the black's kingside position. b6, rook e1, bishop b7, and I here followed the recommendation of Grandmaster Yuri Rozovaev, who finds this idea just maybe 20 years ago. h2, h4. This is brilliant pawn sacrifice, which create unpleasant threat knight g5, and almost forced black to capture on h4, leads to the very unpleasant attack by white after knight bishop takes, knight takes, queen takes, and rook e3. White already intends rook h3, despite the fact white is a pawn down. Two bishops, strong center, and open files on the king side, enough compensation for the material disadvantage. My opponent played g6, rook g3. White already threats to bring the bishop to g5. So after g6, look at that. All dark squares in the black's camp seriously weaken. So black moves the queen away, queen d8. So otherwise bishop g5 almost winning. Bishop h6. So all white pieces are coming very, very fast in the attack. Rook e8, queen h5. Another strong move. White is now threatening already to destroy black's position after bishop take g6, rook take g6, and the checkmate is coming very soon. So here black has to be very, very careful. According to the theory, the strongest one of the moves here is queen e7 with quite interesting complications. But look what happened in the game. So black played knight e7, queen e7, or also queen f6 is another move. But black instead played knight e7, which is a very serious blunder. Why? White's move was a serious blunder because black for a second lost the control over the dark squares. White immediately used this problem by great move, queen e5, intending queen g7 checkmate, and black is in a hopeless situation. After knight f5, bishop takes f5, f6. Already possible for white to play bishop takes e6 with the winning position, but I like just to checkmate my opponent. Look at that. Bishop takes g6, f takes e5, bishop takes e8, check, king h8, bishop g7, and after bishop f6, king f8 and bishop takes d8, black is rook down. Look at that. Rook down after just 25 moves. So white successfully finished his kingside attack. And under the threat of the checkmate, so black just lost material and resigned. So once again, this game showed white great attacking potential in the position with the queen's isolated pawn. Okay, a few more games. The same idea. e4, c6, d4, d5, e takes d5, c takes d5, c4, knight f6, knight c3, e6, knight f3, bishop e7, c takes d5, knight takes d5, bishop d3, castling short side, castling short side, b6. So instead of moving the knight to c6, black is immediately trying to set control over the d5 square. But this move cannot be recommended Same problem. So black is having tactical weakness. This rook on a8, and white easily takes advantage of it. Knight takes d5. Queen takes d5. Queen c2. Threatening. Bishop takes h7 and also bishop e4. The only move in such a situation is bishop b7. Just forgetting about the pawn on h7. f5 leads to the other problem that black's pawn on e6 would become just almost impossible to protect after bishop c4 and rook e1. Black played queen h5, which is a serious blunder because I am not capturing here on h7 anymore. Black just covered, protected the h7 pawn. But I just simply played bishop e4 and black is losing at least one piece. So you have to be very careful when you play in the Panov attack Caro-Kann defense. One mistake, one blunder, and the game is over, like here. After one just bad move b6. Okay, in this position, after bishop d3, one of my opponent played immediately knight takes c3. B takes c3. Knight d7. Short castling and knight f6. So trying to support position of black's pawns on the king side. So now white is not threatening h7 or g7 pawns anyway. However, white is taking advantage of the center control. So because black's knight just left the d7 or c6 square, which allowing white knight simply to take the e5 outpost. After knight e5, h6 and queen f3, we could realize that it's so difficult for black here to develop the pieces. So bishop cannot be developed. b6 never possible anymore. Bishop d7 also leads to the losing of pawn on b7. Short castling also quite dangerous because white just could bring the queen to g3 and intending bishop takes h6. They decided to play queen c7, maybe simultaneously trying to develop the bishop on d7 and maybe to counterattack over the c3 pawn. No problem, c4. So white is supporting, controls over the d5 square by the moving the pawn. So also bishop could go to b2 or maybe to f4 later on. So black just simply castled, and I believe my opponent were quite happy about his position. Maybe next move bishop d7, whatever. And here my move came like a shock. I just played bishop takes h6, another classical combination in the isolated pawn structures. So what's the point of this move? Black looks like forced to capture. G takes. But after queen g3 check, look at that. White is simultaneously x-ray to the c7 queen, which is hanging, and to the king. Only move king to h8, but in that case white is just jumping away with the knight, moving the knight to f7 or g6, and the queen is gone. So black immediately resigned so fast. So once again black cannot solve the problem in the Panov attack. And one more game, also played in the simultaneous exhibitions 2007, e4 c6, d4 d5, E takes d5, c takes d5, c4, knight f6, knight c3, e6, knight f3, bishop e7, c takes d5, knight takes d5, and bishop c4. Short castling, short castling, knight takes c3. So I already explained that this knight takes c3 move is not the strongest continuation according to the theory. Indeed, many players are still playing this knight takes c3 move. After b takes, my opponent decided just to move the queen and to start the counter-attack immediately. Queen a5. So what way white is going to develop his attack? Queen d3. Also protects the pawn on c3. Also maybe intending to play bishop b3 and then bishop c2, looking towards the h7 pawn. b6, rook e1, rook d8, knight e5, and already white is having quite unpleasant threats. Look at that. Rook is always a problem in such a position. So black decided to move the bishop to b7, just protect the diagonal, but now is other problem. Look at that. All white pieces towards the f7 and e6 targets. Knight takes f7. So we already saw on that lesson, bishop takes h6, bishop takes h7, and finally knight takes f7. So all kind of tactical sacrifices near the black's king. King takes f7. Bishop takes e6. King should go to f8. And queen takes on h7. So white is threatening queen g8, checkmate. Bishop f6. Check. 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 And finally checkmate. Another miniature, 20 moves, and black just checkmated. So fast it's happened. And finally, I would like just you to show, I would say, maybe one of the most famous game played in 1976 between Raymond Keane and Tony Miles. This game is also very, very standard example of how white is attacking in the Panov variation, Panov attack of the Caracan defense. So from different moves order, the players to grandmasters from United Kingdom reach the same position which we studied already for so many lessons. Knight c6, short castling, rook e1, and knight f6 played. Sorry. Miles played the knight f6. Okay. Bishop g5. So another very important move. So after knight went to f6, white is trying to improve the pressure over the center squares d5 by moving the bishop to g5. At the same time, white could destroy black's position on the king side by the bishop takes f6. At the same time, white is also intending the bishop c2 and queen d3, in which f6, removing the f6 defender is also an important idea. Knight b4, bishop b1, b6, knight e5, bishop b7. More or less, all this idea we already studied from the previous game I showed, but here comes something new. Rook e3. King is bringing the rook to help his kingside attack. After rook e3, white is already intending bishop takes f6 and then decisive mating combination. Let's say in case of rook c8 takes, check on h5 and rook h3, white just checkmate black's king. There's no way to stop this checkmate. So the threat of bishop takes f6, look how actively all the white pieces are posed towards the black's king side. Black has to play g6. g6, rook g3, and only now rook c8, bishop h6, rook e8, a3, knight c6. And now white started decisive attack on the king side by the sacrifices. Knight take g6, bishop take g6, and queen b1. Suddenly black has no pieces which could protect black's pawn on g6, and queen take g6 now comes as a decisive mating threat. Knight e5, d takes e5, knight e4, always forced, knight takes e4, king h7, and final smash, knight f6, bishop takes f6. Finally white's queen arriving into the attack. Queen takes g6, king h8, and checkmate is coming after bishop g7. White very successfully finished his kingside attack. Definitely black had better opportunities for defending his position, and black made a few inaccuracies, but I just like to show you what way white is taking advantage of his isolated pawn, and thanks to very active position of all the pieces and the space advantage, just bring all the forces to the king side, where the black's position becomes very dangerous, and in all the games we showed today just very successfully finished the attack. Thanks everybody for watching. So with this third lecture we finished our course about the Panov attack in the Caro-Kann defense. I hope you enjoyed the lecture. If you have any question, you can contact me on my website www.chesslessons.wordpress.com. See you next time in continue my Gambit Guy lectures. Bye.